The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, is the latest installment in the Conjuring universe, also known as the Conjureverse, or the Warrenverse. It follows an investigation conducted by Ed and Lorraine Warren of David Glitzel's possession, and subsequently the possession of Arnie Johnson. The two paranormal investigators attempt an exorcism, which puts Ed in a hospital bed after being stabbed in the heart by an invisible, coma-inducing demonic knife, wielded by none other than the possessed David. Despite their efforts, this just makes things worse, as the infamous Arnie Johnson becomes host of the demon and eventually kills Bruno, his landlord. Now, the Warrens must face a greater evil than any other. The United States judicial system decides a fate for Arnie in the electric chair, but the Warrens are determined to prove the existence of the supernatural to the court by finding the source of the evil that caused the killing in the first place. Spoiler, Arnie is white. I just want to preface that this movie didn't scare me, and that's why The Conjuring, Devil Made Me Do It receives an instant F. Joking aside, this movie is by no means a bad one. I have only seen The Conjuring 2 out of the trilogy, and so I can't compare with the first installment, but this one is far superior to its predecessor. Starting with the story, I appreciated how the supernatural elements were handled on a whole, as there wasn't the regular build-up of paranormal activity, which eventually leads to an epic demon fight at the end, like in the second Conjuring film. Rather, it started out with said epic demon fight, the exorcism of David, which was the weakest part of the film for me. The only highlight to the exorcism antics was witnessing Satan launching a plate at the priest's face. Furtherly, I found that the whole first act of the movie wasn't on par with the rest of the movie, not as captivating, and so less engaging, as it was spending time setting up plot points for later on. This isn't a problem in the sense that they wanted to set up and pay off elements of the story, more so, it wasn't done as smoothly as the rest of the film. It made some of the scenes slightly odd, but there's one standout example, which is the most awkward scene in the movie. This is the hospital bedside flashback scene, where Lorraine Warren is approached by the priest from the exorcism and splurts out a story of how she met Ed, which is shown in a golden old-timey kind of tint. And then almost immediately after that, it ends. This just struck me as lazy writing, especially considering that the theme of the Warrens' love leads to their final triumph. I'm sure they could have come up with a more interesting way to establish this, maybe through symbolism, but who knows, I don't write movies. Staying on the subject of story, the interchangeability of the demon/curse/satanist, witch/who is the villain of the movie, worked in the movie's favour. It meant that the story didn't rely on exposition of some demon no one gives a shit about, as to avoid a meaningless demon that doesn't have a motivation. Rather, it was a more ambiguous evil embodied by the daughter of a priest who was interested in the demonic objects of his basement. The father of the Satanist, the former priest, explains that the intention of Satanism is to create chaos and suffering. I'm pretty sure it's not in real life, but it's fine in the context of a movie. Which means that the evil is no more than that. It's a raw battle between good and evil. Now, the daughter of the priest, with all the demonic artifacts, is not the strongest choice for the antagonist. As soon as the corrupt priest was introduced, it was obvious that he'd have something to do with the Satanist/curse/demon. However, this did introduce an element of human corruption to the evil, which is exactly what they're trying to achieve with the curses and possessions, more like the spread of a disease that preys indiscriminately. Personally, this concept is much scarier to me than a demon called Pazuzu. The dialogue is another point I'd like to mention, as some of it, whether it was the delivery or the choice of words, was uninteresting and unengaging. Again, it wasn't consistently bad, neither was it consistently good. Just average dialogue for an average horror movie. On a side note, it's still better than the likes of other demonic horror movies like Ouija. In addition to the dialogue, none of the performance stood out in particular. Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson have played these characters a million times over by now, so they were just fine. The supporting characters were also okay. Nothing really more to add. Now, I want to address the VFX in this movie. which were completely fine for the context of a Conjuring movie, i.e. the reanimated body in the morgue wasn't goofy looking. However, any of the body contortion stuff or the possession effects, boiling skin, veins showing, crusty eyes, etc., were unnecessary in my opinion. These spooky and unholy effects took me out of the realism in this movie. The practical effects were much better. For example, the makeup used on Arnie when he's in prison isn't ridiculous, but it does make him look extremely unwell. Unsurprising for someone who is being messed around with by unholy spirits. This, in conjunction with the grimy and damp sets and lighting of the prison scenes, prove much more effective than the dumb demon faces and broken spinal columns. The movie worked best when it relied not on scary CG monsters, which were not often relied on, and was most effective when it used suspense-building techniques and foreboding atmosphere. You only see supernatural figures and apparitions several times, and they didn't frighten me. However, when Lorraine crawls under the house to find a witch's totem, the suspense was built appropriately for the reveal of the totem, which turned out to be a part of the curse put on David. I was expecting something stupid like a human head to be in wraps, but rather a symbol of the evil they were fighting was used. I'd much rather this than a demon chase scene where Lorraine is scuttling about under the house, as this wouldn't have added weight to the case like the evil totem did. It'd just be an excuse for more cheap scares, which is boring. I have one final complaint I'd like to address, and that is the scene in which the assistant to the Warrens, I assume, pops up out of nowhere in a phone booth and gives expository dialogue regarding the totem, if I remember correctly. This comes across as a really out of place and almost afterthoughtish scene, just to make the story make more sense. He appears once again later in the movie and is told to call the police to where the satanic altar is, and he basically says, "What? Okay, whatever you say," making him a convenient plot device. It's a bit of a nitpick, but the story relies on him for it to make perfect sense. And that's the only purpose he really has. It's kind of a tragedy. How unfortunate. So, in conclusion, the movie is a fairly strong horror flick, and definitely made for the cinema rather than to be watched at home, and I'm definitely factoring this in. I have a generally positive view on the movie. There's not a lot to complain about, and definitely a majority of points for praise. I'd recommend seeing it if you like just going to the cinema to see a movie for entertainment, and I'd give it a score of about 6.5 out of 10. It wasn't a groundbreaking horror movie like The Exorcist. Interestingly, there was a nod to it, intentional or not, at the start of the movie when the priest is dropped off by a taxi to exorcise David, and he stands in front of the house looking up at the lit-up window. And the movie wasn't as visually striking as Hereditary, say, a movie I'm a big fan of, but it is by no means terrible, and deserves some praise for not relying on this big CG spooky monster, not exhausting demonic exorcism fights, not doing the usual paranormal build-up of objects moving and doors closing, but being a movie about a genuine battle between good and evil. And I see this as a fit ending for the main line of Conjuring movies, but this likely will not be the case. At least, for the Conjuring universe, we need more spin-offs about the Warrens' scary toys. This movie is the second film I've seen since cinemas reopened in the UK, the first being Nomadland, which was absolutely fantastic, and I discussed it in the first episode of my podcast called the Burnt Ham Podcast, which I host with my friend Tom. Go check that out. But this cinema experience was different, as there were many idiots about who wouldn't shut up. This is especially frustrating as I work at the establishment. It inexplicably makes it more annoying. I do not know why. To my left, I had an annoying ass couple who would not stop talking to each other. I hadn't a clue, and I still don't, as to what they were saying. Probably talking about anything but the movie. And to my right, I had a middle-aged woman who kept audibly reacting to the movie. Every time suspense started to build, it was shattered by her saying something along the lines of, "No, don't go in," or, "You shouldn't have done that," as if her saying these lines actually affected the movie or anyone's experience positively. This kind of thing makes me appreciate streaming services, but it's really a frustrating catch-22 as the cinema is objectively better due to audio and picture quality, and my local cinema's seats are very comfortable, and the room is air-conditioned. But you can exchange these luxuries for the peace of your own humble abode, where you're not bothered by lovebirds or boomers alike, and you have any opportunity to stop the film, rewind, go for a poo, make a drink, whatever you want to do. Guess I'll have to sell my soul to the devil for a home cinema room. And at least if I end up in hell, I won't have to decide between home or the cinema, as my hell is being forced to watch rom-coms for the rest of eternity, and I don't really care about the quality at that point. Well, I hope you enjoyed my take on The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. It was a lot of fun to write about the movie, and I'll definitely be doing it again. Let me know down below if there are any other movies you'd like to hear my thoughts on, whether it be horror, action, or sci-fi space opera. Check out the Burnt Ham podcast, and stay tuned for a different series I've got in pre-production. I'm not going to say any more than it involves the small movie collection of crap I found in charity shops. Thanks for listening, and see you next time. In a bit.